an Excelsior Studios original production. Throughout this podcast, sensitive subjects such as sexual assault, eating disorders, and suicidal thoughts will be mentioned. Listen with care.
I mean, a lot of people have messaged me about the latest episode of my podcast because it's word for word transcripts of our messages when I was catfishing you. So, a lot of people have had nice things to say about that.
Yeah, what are so many people saying?
I mean, they think it's hilarious that that's how you got caught. I mean, it's one of the funniest stories that's ever been told.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. Yeah, it's the most ironic and hilarious thing. I agree with you. I laid in bed and had my own chuckles about it, so.
I mean, you'll forever be known as the girl who risked it all for Ione.
Be quiet. I know, at least it was a pizza delivery.
So you've made it up to this point in the series. You heard our deepest, darkest secret last week, what we did to catch Megan Stoner. And if you believe that we went a little bit far, I don't blame you, because I feel that way too. But I want you to understand what you just heard, that is how Megan feels about last week's episode. I believe this call was from this past Saturday. Megan calls Justin every week asking him about the podcast. They've been conversing basically since about a month after she got arrested. It seems to me like she kind of considers Justin one of her best friends. She calls him all the time. So if you're uncomfortable by what we did, again, I am too, but Megan's for some reason not. And we're going to get into what all of those jail calls have been because Megan has not gotten better since she went to jail. So don't worry, I'm going to tell you those antics in the coming episodes, but I wanted you to hear directly from Justin and kind of debrief after last week's episode about how we're feeling, why we did what we did, and little things that I left out. I'm Amanda, and this is Don't Waste This Effing Podcast, the story of Megan Stoner. How do you feel now that the episode is out? Are you embarrassed? Are you happy? What do you think?
I'm certainly not embarrassed. I have no remorse. I have no regret as far as what we did to catch her. I'm glad that the story has been told. Yeah.
But that's not how you always thought. Initially, we were upset.
No. So the day that she was caught, it's like I was working that day and I couldn't really talk to you for a few hours. And like when we initially talked, we were kind of like euphoric that it had worked. And I think it was that night, like I called you again, like, so this would have been maybe like 5-6 hours later. I called you a second time that day. I remember we both were really impacted when we saw online that like she had been assigned a bed number. And I remember you specifically saying to me that night, like, or maybe I said it to you now that I think about it, like, she'll never trust anyone ever again. Like, there's a part of her that will like always in every interaction feel like it's a setup because of this. And that impacted me, that like on a human level, we have completely humiliated this girl. We have completely betrayed any trust she might have felt for another person. And then, you know, eventually when we talked to her more in prison or in jail, it became clear she doesn't feel that way. And that's made it really easy. There's no part of her that like is humiliated. There's no part of her that, and you know, Amanda, I've spent, dozens of hours on the phone with her since she's been in jail. And like no part of her feels the way that we just described, the way we anticipated she would.
The thing that I think is notable is when we saw that she went to jail, we were also like every single day she was begging for money online. And at a certain point we were like, she's going to have meals every single day. She's not going to have to beg for money to DoorDash, and she's going to have a roof over her head. She's not going to have to beg for someone to pay for an Airbnb or pay for an Airbnb herself. She was always going to go to jail, you know? And actually, maybe she wasn't always going to go to jail because I think actually with the original charges, had she not broken her bail agreement so many times and had her bail revoked, I actually think maybe she could have just gotten out like a plea deal or something. I think it was part of her kind of antics and going crazy that made the prosecutors think like, okay, she's going to serve a little bit of jail time.
Said that to her. I've said that to her in recent months. I'm like, you know, you would have gotten away with all of it if you had just after her initial arrests, like that May, if she had April or May, whenever it was, if she had just done the right thing from then on out,
Right.
she probably would have never gone back to jail. It was the fact that she got her bail revoked and then she ran that made the consequences so much worse for her. And we have court documents about like how like in her hearings, the judge and the prosecutor seemed to recognize after we got her doing what we did that like at that point when like after she had run and everything, she was a much higher like priority to them than what she otherwise would have.
Because I think another misconception is we always say that like, well, they were never going to try that hard for a first-time nonviolent offender. And you've said that. But at the same time, they were trying to find her. They went to her mom's house multiple times. They checked in the washing machine to make sure she wasn't hiding in there. I mean, they were trying to find her. There was a police officer who was apparently dedicated that, Kyle and Mike and Alyssa and Chloe and Alex were in contact with that was trying to locate her. So the police were trying to find her, and the police were aware that people were trying to find her as well. I don't know that they were aware of what we were doing because we weren't in contact with them. But I mean, there was one comment I got that someone said that we went too far. And on one hand, sure. On the other hand, when people get arrested for crimes and violate their bail agreements, the police do try and go catch them. It's just, what priority are they?
I agree with you. Like, they were trying to do things and like they had gone and looked for her at her mother's house. But like, in terms of actually sending out a manhunt and searching high and low, they just weren't going to do that. She wasn't a murderer. When people who are accused of loftier crimes than Megan have gone free for years, looking every minute of every day to figure out where is this person, like they sort of assume a person like her they'll get eventually. Because like as the story goes, like when Alyssa made the call and gave them the information, they went right away. I mean, from the time the call was made to the time she was picked up, I don't even think was a full hour.
No, and we were concerned about that, remember? We were concerned that maybe they wouldn't prioritize it at all.
Right.
Because from our perspective, we were thinking, well, they just don't even care. And I also think that you and I felt a duty being public faces, doing the Twitter spaces, and the admins like Vero, Alyssa, Chloe, Kyle, Mike, and Alex. I think that all of them felt a duty because they were kind of public faces as well in the pursuit to get Megan, that when people saw her tweet day after day that she needed money and all of these things, and we knew she was continuing to scam, people would almost yell at us sometimes that she wasn't caught yet. And it's like, well, what do you want us to do? So we did something.
Right. And I personally felt pushed to do more after the incident with Tom. And like when we learned about him and what she had done to him, I had known him previously, and knowing she did that and my conversations with him around the time that we were running the scheme, if you remember, like he would message me every couple days and be like, she's reaching out again. And it was taking a toll on him. And she messaged him at 4 a.m. and we got her picked up, like, I think, like 2 or 3 in the afternoon. So like less than 12 hours before she was picked up, she was continuing to harass him and confuse him further as to what the right thing to do was. And like, when people say, oh, this was extreme, you shouldn't take the law into your own hands, they weren't going to search high and low for her. There was a reasonable chance she could have been out for at least a few more weeks, if not a few more months. I understand she probably would have been caught, well by now. I don't think she could have run forever, but every single day she was out, she was going to ruin somebody's day, begging for money, confusing them, making threats against them. I mean, she did it to us, and you're going to talk about this later. Once she got in jail, she went through a few weeks where she was obsessed with somebody bailing her out again. And so, she did it to us, like, even from behind bars. And so her, like, having access to social media and the internet and being able to find people and create new Google Voice numbers, I mean, she knows no better. And the sooner she was brought in, the better. And the only way to expedite the process was to...
And also just the person that should be the most offended by all of this is her, and she's not. I mean, you're like her best friend.
Correct. She calls me multiple times a week, and that can't be lost on the listeners.
Hey, really quick, I hope you're enjoying this episode as much as I enjoy putting these together for you. But while you're listening, I have thousands of weekly listeners and only 64 reviews on Spotify. Please be sure to like and subscribe, rate me 5 stars, and comment. If you want to support this independent podcast, there's a link to buy me a coffee in the description. Anything you give is much appreciated. And if you want to learn how to make a podcast like mine, I have a course that teaches you exactly how to do so. That's linked in the description as well.
Like, I talk to this broad all the time. She calls me all the time, and I have to pay every single time for the privilege of speaking to her, like through the jail app that she calls through. Like, I have to pay for the call and not her. And it, like, I've been rough with her. It's not like I just automatically turn nice. I am nice to her most of the time, but there's times she does some really vile things, and I have screamed at her. And, the next week she calls right back, and she just acts like, "Oh, how are you? How's your week been?"
It is
it's
really
utterly
crazy.
bizarre.
Okay, so what came over you when you were sending all those texts?
Well, so to back up a little further than that, when you came up with the idea, I was always much less confident that it would work than you were. You always sort of thought this could be her demise. I always knew she would bite. Like, I knew she would not be able to leave like a yoni in the state alone and not like at least figure out what it was about. But my confidence that you and I would be able to pull something like that off without her getting spooked, just from what I had known of her other interactions with other people in recent weeks around the time we made it, she was very spooky, very skeptical of everyone. And so I just didn't see it working out. But when we got that first message that was like, I would like to get on the wait list, and she then, like, a couple messages in of us just like, kind of screaming at each other about what to say. And she was like, I want to be your first client. At that point, we sort of knew she's not going to let this go. Like, she's going to pursue this, as far as she can. And so at that point, I knew if we play our cards right, there's a good chance we could get her. If I had to describe what it was like when the messages were getting hot and heavy, all the time, it was incredibly intense. Because as people heard, like, she was sending 30 messages at a time. And I would have to read through them. And then because of she insisted that we message her on, she could see as soon as I opened them and would read them. And so that didn't leave a lot of time for me to call you or message you and figure out exactly how we wanted to respond. A lot of times I just wouldn't, just because there wasn't enough time. But I felt a high amount of pressure to not let the mask slip. And when I would call you, you and I would argue about what the right way forward was, because you always want to be a little tougher with her and I want to be a little lighter. And I think we got the right balance, like, through our arguments. It was such a level of intensity because she doesn't stop for hours on end. I mean, she will just bombard you with message after message. And so, like, knowing I had to be responsive, I had to pay attention as though I was a counselor to a really sick person, was kind of the way I approached it. Essentially, like, she was in crisis all the time, and I had to respond like it was a crisis.
Well,
all
and
the
then
time.
and then on top of that, it's annoying because all of the stories she was telling you, you knew were not true.
Exactly. And that's a great point. Like, when she would start alluding to former Indiana Speaker Brian Bosma, like, obviously we've heard her admit that was a lie. And then to hear her speak to somebody that she thought knew nothing about her and her just use the same lies over again, or some of the things with Haribo, other lies. She often would talk about her partner Jake, who multiple times we've proven is not a real
There's
person.
never even been a partner. It's not even that there's a partner and there's someone named Jake. She's never had a boyfriend or a partner. At least not someone long term that's like with her side by side, taking on her political clients for her and all that stuff.
Right. No, that's all false. And, like, the idea that, like, these stories she would tell with these characters that, like, were either not real or she'd never talked to, and And she's telling them all over again. And that kind of hardened my resolve to get this done, because it really kind of confirmed, I think, for both of us, like, she's never going to stop. She's never going to get better. Here's this girl she's got a Facebook group of how many people that are like watching her every move, trying to find where she's at. She's on the run. She's facing all these felonies. She's only 25. Everything seems to be imploding around her, and she cannot let go of this fictitious persona of herself that she's built up. And so she has to continually find new people online that she can pretend to be that version of herself with. And it was never going to stop. She's not going to stop when she gets out. I really had hoped that maybe a year in jail or 6 months or whatever she was going to get, we didn't know at the time we were doing this, would maybe shape her up enough that she might, I don't know that I ever thought she could get better, but like maybe just be more okay with herself and not have to live a fantasy life all the time. And I can tell you right now, like, she is no better. Like, she to this day is just as gaslighty and dodgy as she's ever been. And it was really something to experience it from the perspective of somebody who she thought knew nothing about her.
Looking back, more comfortable with what we did than I am. I think that I'm a little bit more uncomfortable with it still, but you talk to her a lot more. So that probably has to do with it.
Right. I talk to Megan every week. At one point it was daily. At some points it was twice daily. Like, and so I know her better. I've met her in person before. You know, my relationship with her is longer than yours. So yeah, I guess I'm more comfortable with what I've done, because I guess in part because she's the one that should hate us most for what we did. And like, she just doesn't. Like, she's just like, oh, like, Megan is such a transactional person where like, if you have something she wants, she doesn't care what your history is with that person. You know what I mean? Like, if she wants to know what the podcast was about this week, she's going to call and find out. And she doesn't really care what you've done to her, like what you said to her last week that made her upset.
Loves the podcast. I mean, she's trying to get Aunt Linda to listen. She's getting her jail people to, like, her friends in jail to listen. I mean, like, I think Megan kind of thinks that she's a celebrity. And maybe that's one of the reasons I'm not comfortable with what we've done, is because I don't want to turn Megan into a celebrity. But at the same time, engaged in deception. I know that's wrong. I know all of those things are wrong. I just also know what Megan did was wrong. And I'm glad she was caught. And I'm glad she's serving time.
Exactly. I'm glad she was caught. I'm glad we took her off the streets faster. And I say off the streets, really, like, we took her offline faster than
That's the worst
what
part,
otherwise
actually.
would have been if we had. Like, we got, like, she's no longer able to find strangers online and harass them and manipulate them and get them to believe a narrative that's not true. We completely took that from her. To be clear, we're both very clear-eyed. She would have been caught at some point, if not by us. But I also know it would have been longer. And every day was another day she could have found another Tom, another, Faith, or like any of the people that have been on the podcast that have talked about their experiences with her.
And there could be people that we don't know about still. That's what's crazy to me, actually, is like, I'm half expecting, if this podcast keeps getting pushed out further, which we're gaining a couple hundred like listeners every week. So part of me is in the position that, like, zero chance that at some point someone's like, wait, that girl was reaching out to me all of last summer and just never found out, and it was never involved with the community.
And Megan has told me that. She's like, there's some that you guys don't know about that I owe money to that have, like, never come forward. She's told me that proudly.
That's lovely.
I'm sorry.
That's lovely. Out of the story. I know I didn't put everything in. What do you think I left out that the listeners need to know about?
I think just people should be more aware of just how much you and I feuded, not in a bad way where we were like actually mad at each other, but like the amount of like arguing we would do between each message, and knowing like she was sitting there waiting on that reply and could see we had opened it. And so we knew we only had like 30 seconds to respond. And like the arguing and the screaming, it
There was no
truly
screaming.
was, well, not screaming, but
It was
like,
frustration.
yes, frustration. Um,
And I think it
of
actually got worse when we started talking. If we were not on the phone and it was just a text and we couldn't be on the phone, then we would be looping in Brewster sometimes, or then we would loop in the group chat with like Mike and Kyle. And it was like, I think one of the reasons that you felt so overwhelmed, because it was overwhelming, like it was just texting back and forth about intense topics. You were getting approval or asking like 5 different people at certain times what to say. And then we mentioned the group chat of like Alex, Mike, and Kyle. We didn't mention our group of friends from college Republicans that we met through that were also a separate group chat. So I think at a certain point, you had 10 people at a time telling you what to say and what to do. And that's got to be really overwhelming. And you were the only one.
I have to, like, in order for me to do it, first of all, like, of a lot of those people, I was one of the only people who had heard the call with Haribo. And so I felt like I had a little bit more of a grasp on how these people spoke about this kind of work, like, than other people did. And yet other people were still trying to tell me how to respond. And then also, like, so much of it had been my own voice and my own take on it, that even if, like, there was nothing necessarily wrong with what you were saying, you know, as a response to that one message, I didn't feel like it felt that it felt like the voice of the character that we had created at that point. We had to sort of keep the same tone. And so I didn't feel like it was quite the right way to say it. And I mean, this was happening like dozens of times a day, this level of stress that I think you can kind of hear in our voices, like that we would feel over these, like every single time she responded, this is what we went through. And where we, you didn't leave this out, you put this in, but like, I remember the part of the messages where she was like graphically detailing, you know, her fake relationship with Haribo's wife and all of that. When she was sending all those messages at one time, I remember I was sitting at dinner with a friend and I had told her like that I was going to be busy taking personal time for the evening. I remember like I was talking to this like a good old friend that I hadn't seen in a long time. And like the whole time I was sitting there, I could just feel the messages coming one after another. And just knowing in my head, it's Meg, that is her just like bombarding me. And like every time I would look at my phone during this dinner, like I would have like 20 messages. And that may not have always come through in the way that the AI read the messages. That like she's one of those people that will like send a bunch of texts like for each sentence instead of one long one. So like sometimes these texts would be coming like very small snippets at a time. And every single time I would feel my phone buzz. And it's just incredibly anxiety inducing.
The series, though, because you've told me that there's things that I left out, like the Janice Dean.
Well, one of my favorite Megan things of all time. Amanda's just giving me the opportunity to tell this because it's my favorite. But when Megan was arrested the first time back in the spring, her, you know, everybody was going to her social media and checking constantly to see if she was back online yet. And even after she got bonded out, she was quiet for a few days. And so everybody was kind of waiting to see. And for like, I think a couple weeks there, the most recent thing on her social media was a retweet of the Fox News weather girl, Janice Dean, that just said, "You can be angry and still be kind." And it was just so... When she retweeted that, she had no idea what was coming her way. And it was just such a poetic way to sort of allude to what was coming in her life, where like that was sort of her attitude through the next 2 years was like, I get I've made all these people mad, but I still demand be true.
That is something we've talked about with her, where Megan will to her on a call recently, where she'll be like, well, but I've paid my time. Like, I've paid my dues to society, and so that's that. And I think you said something along the lines of, like,
Well,
what did you say?
I told her that she said that well, you're conflating two things. One thing that she said was, if my aunt can forgive me, I think society should too, because Aunt Linda was kind of one of her her first victims, and they've apparently made amends. And she said, and I said, you know, God can forgive anything, but in order for other people to forgive you, like, remorse is an important part of it. And she just goes, like, it just doesn't even register with her when you say things like, and then she said to me recently, my aunt and everyone else who's a part of my support system, which is just her aunt, she just wants it to sound bigger than it is. Everyone has told me that when I get out of here, I will have paid 90% of my debt to society. And so I just need to pay the restitution, and then I can get this part of my life behind me. And she brought this up multiple times where she's like, well, I submitted a guilty plea. She said that in an effort to try to get you to stop doing the podcast. And it doesn't seem to register with her that all the consequences she has faced up until now are the result of scamming 4 people and running from the police. And she has paid nothing else back. And
Yeah.
she doesn't seem to understand how long this is going to take her to get behind her. And it's very clear in her tone when she talks about it that, like, she's not paying anything back that she's not legally forced to. Like, she's not going back and righting her wrongs anymore because she feels like a year in jail was enough for what she did. And some listeners might feel like a year in jail feels right, but there's a lot of things she did that she will never serve a day in jail for. She feels like if she wasn't charged with it, there was nothing wrong with it, and that, you know, like, it's very strange.
What I'll say about that is, to a degree, I understand her feeling that way, because at a certain point, you need to move on with your life, and you can't beat yourself up over something that you did a long time ago. And I understand that sentiment, and I get it. Like, bogging yourself down and, like, I screwed up, I did something wrong. The problem is there's, like, no regret, it feels. Like, the problem is that, like, well, I did this wrong and I don't need to right this wrong, but it's like, I am entitled to you fixing this for me, or, like, your help fix this.
Right. And she oftentimes will use that to manipulate us into giving, like, well, I'm not going to be able to pay people back if, you know, I'm in here much longer. I'm not going to be able to, you know, right any of these wrongs if you don't, you know, call my mom right now. You know, it's just, she's very manipulative in terms of trying to use, like, the fact that we want to see more justice into us doing favors.
And she's not entitled to that from anybody.
No. I mean, she's lucky we even give her the time of day to talk to her.
So, other thing I forgot is, one of the funnier stories is when she was, like, back and forth she was with everybody that summer. Like, remember when she found you were blocked on everything, and then she unblocked you to be like, hi, I need to get into contact with Alex Brewster. And you were like...
No, exactly. It was worse than that. Like, she had been messaging me about a couple different things, and I had talked to her a couple times, I think, over the course of like a week. And then she got in trouble with her driving again, and I messaged her and I said, Megan, please stop driving. You're like a threat to everyone on the roads. Like, it's clear you're not capable to operate a vehicle. Like, please, for your own safety and for that of, like, everyone in central Indiana, please get off the roads. And she blocked me. And then, like, 3 days later, she unblocks me again, and she messages me that she needs to get in contact with Alex. Like, none of that had happened. And I mentioned that earlier. Like, when you have something she wants, like, she wanted to get that message to Alex, and Alex had her blocked. And so she knew I talked to Alex, so she had to get that message through. And so she was willing to forget what I said about her driving and act like I didn't say that and that she hadn't blocked me, and act like we were just normal friends to get me to do that. And I think I said, yes, I would tell her, because I probably was going to talk to Alex about it, like, to make fun of her, not to, pass the message along. But I was like, yeah, I'll tell her. And she was like, thank you, Justin, you're a saint. And then what you do, like, and then she asked me to do something else for her. And, like, I think I blocked her after that, because, like, and she's done that before, where, like, since she's been in jail, if, she needs to get a message to somebody or she wants you to look up something on her My Case, she's not like super appreciative of it. And like, oh, thank you. That was a big help. Like, I know you didn't have to do that. Oh, thanks. Okay. And now that you're on my side and you're helping me, do this now. And it's like, you like have to cut her off and be like, no, that was like a one-time favor that I'm doing for you. Like, I'm ending the call now.
Order you around like you're her assistant.
She calls me all the time she called me one time in jail and asked me to look up something on My Case for somebody that she was there with that I didn't even know. And I was like, Megan, like, I'm doing things right now. Like, I'm not just going to sit and look up things on My Case for everybody in the Hamilton County Jail whenever you call. Don't do this again. And she just went, okay.
And then the other really important part of that story that you left out is that you don't know Alex Brewster aside from through her. You guys have never,
exactly.
like, up until she was arrested and people got together in Indiana, you guys had never met in person. You had never crossed paths in any social media circle. There's no
At that
reason.
point in my life, my relationship with her was exclusively confined to our mutual hatred of Megan.
Even like you guys hadn't even talked one-on-one really. She came up in the
No.
Twitter space and said something, and we followed each other on Twitter and like liked a couple of her Megan Stoner tweets. It was not even like you guys hadn't even messaged each other before, I don't think.
I don't think so. Yeah, very limited if we had.
You to get this message through to this person who you only know about each other because I scammed both of you, basically.
You're two of my chief haters.
People trying to get me to stop scamming people, and I need to scam her and go through you to scam. Like,
I would just say to anyone who like thinks that the podcast is like winding down in like last week's episode was like the wildest that it gets. Megan did something in jail that is the craziest thing that she ever did. Like, you've not yet heard the craziest story that Megan ever did. She got arguably worse in jail, and we talked about that a little bit on this episode. But, like, stay tuned, because it's going to be worth it, because she is just as bad to present day.
And you don't just have to take our word for it. I'm going to bring you that story next week. But for now, thank you for listening. I'm Amanda. This is Don't Waste This Effing Podcast, the story of Megan Stoner.